What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Thinking Market. I realized that a lot of podcasts that I like will give somewhat of an introduction. And they'll talk about just I related general information, housewarming stuff, I guess, things that have been going on. I can talk about some things that have been going on. I had an idea that came to mind of like, what were the thinkers of the past? What were their personalities like? Like, how serious were people like Machiavelli or Da Vinci or, Carl Menger? Um, how serious were they? Isaac Newton, Nicholas Copernicus, Galileo. How serious were they? Einstein. The geniuses of the past, were they just like never had time for humor or leisure, or I guess they had leisure time to study and whatnot, but what were their personalities like? We talk about their ideas, their inventions, their insights, their genius, but were they silly? I think that matters. Because if you want to emulate yourself after these geniuses, then wouldn't you want to know how they were in the world, how they moved through the world, how they acted? Did they take the time to smell the roses? Were they type A? I don't know. All interesting stuff. We had our Menger Academy Pillar 2 last weekend about money and methodology, epistemology. How do we know what we know? How do we derive laws of economics? Law of diminishing marginal utility. I gave 2 lectures on money and banking. Last podcast I did discuss money. But this podcast I want to discuss banking. But before we get to that, I want to continue this semblance of an introduction. There's a good book called The Art Spirit by Robert Henry. Incredible book. He was an art professor, I believe, at NYU. And he wrote this book around 1907. $1929. No, he died in 1929. 1923. So this book called The Art Spirit is an incredible book. He's a professor of art, painting, but yet his book reads like philosophy because it is philosophy. It's applicable to not just painting, but all acts of art. And he's saying that like art is like everything we do. Art is science. The way we approach art should be very scientific. And then Mises says that, history, science is an art. The way we can describe ideas and the things we know, the telling of history is artistic. Now, of course, this is premised that science is somewhat empirical in its understanding of knowledge, but also deductive in its transferring and acquisition of knowledge, of teaching someone deductively ideas from a beginning premise, such as human action. And I think if you approach economics as an art, is a very different perspective than approaching economics as some dismal mathematical science that may resemble physics. And frankly, I don't know how many economists that exist today will tell you that mathematical models are bullshit. But that's the truth. So many economists are just mathematicians with the envy of the physicist envy. They want to be as distinguished and prestigious as the physicist. But you cannot model human consciousness. And you cannot model subjective values in human decision making. Reducing the complexity of human beings and society into models that fit nicely on graphs is dehumanizing. And the usefulness of doing such a thing is for political control. If we just tell people what they ought to do and what directions they should go, then therefore in this equation we can maximize utility, the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest number of people. This is dehumanizing. So that's why economics, in my perspective, in the tradition of the Austrian school, is seen differently, as qualitative, as literary. That's actually more elegant and more encompassing and more descriptive of what economics is, which is social cooperation, which is the market society, entrepreneurship, the role of ideas, of thinking, of perceiving, of living life in uncertain conditions but trying to make them better. As my professor Darren Jurgen defines economics, it's humankind's struggle for survival. We're struggling. It's a struggle. We haven't reached utopia. We don't have pure abundance, the Garden of Eden. So these are some ideas, introductory ideas. But now, drumroll, dun, 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 let's get into the meat of this podcast episode, which is what do banks do with our money? That's the question. And I'm going to answer this and tell you. Because it's very simplistic. Not only economics, but science should not be complicated. It should be simplistic. So I will simplistically describe to you what banks do with our money. It's a technical approach, a technical process a bit. So we're going to learn some techniques. But basically, money went into banks under the idea that they were money warehouses, that they would store the money and protect the money. Guards would defend the money, which was gold, in the banks. Gold and silver, metallic standard. And the banks would issue a receipt that said, this receipt, upon redemption at the money warehouse, would redeem this certain amount of weight of gold. So this is what's considered deposit banking. You deposit money, gold or silver, into a money warehouse, and you get what's called a money substitute, which is basically an IOU of a certain weight of gold that you can redeem at the bank. You also had loan banking, which was the idea of kind of like investment banking. You put your money into a loan bank that can loan it out at interest. And then say you go to a loan bank, you give the money and a contract for a year. And upon a year, you can redeem your money plus interest. So in that case, it's kind of a transfer of property rights. But under deposit banking, the property rights of that amount of gold is yours. What we have under our current system is what's called fractional reserve banking, which is essentially the combination of loan banking and deposit banking. So what happens is you deposit your money in a bank, but yet they loan it out. And what happens is this loaned out money goes into the economy, goes to people, entrepreneurs, investors, producers, and consumers. This money that's been loaned out usually, okay, so there's this idea of a reserve ratio, which is how much, like for a loan bank, what percentage of the money should be kept in the bank, right? But with fractional reserve banking and a central bank, what we have today, is they set the reserve ratio of 10%. So 10% of the gold that's been deposited by all the people in a bank is kept. Only 10% is kept in the bank. 90% is loaned out. Now, these people take the money, they invest it, it cycles through the economy, and then eventually it becomes deposited again in another bank, which also has a 10% reserve ratio. So now you extrapolate this over and over and over again, and this becomes the phenomenon of the money multiplier effect, which essentially means that with a certain amount of money, the money has exponentially multiplied due to this 10% reserve ratio. So what was $100,000 in an economy becomes $1 million. But this is where it gets very technical, is there was $100,000 of real money. The $1 million is not real money. Only $100,000 is real money. The $900,000 is money substitutes, seats, IOUs. But what happens is the government says you cannot do a run on the bank. You cannot redeem your money all at once with everyone else at the bank, because obviously this would create a bank failure because they don't have the reserves. They don't have the actual money. They don't have the gold in the warehouse that when you demand with your receipt for the gold, they don't have it. So they won't give it to you. And legal tender laws is saying that you have to accept the money substitutes, the dollars. The dollars originally meant a certain weight of gold, a specific weight of gold. Now they don't. This is combined with the fact that there's a central bank called the Federal Reserve that won't allow banks to fail. They say they're too important of an institution, they're too big to fail. So they bail them out. This creates the moral hazard. There's a very much more technical process if you want to listen to it, lecture on economics, about how exactly T-bills, treasury bills, buying back bonds, the Federal Reserve, the argument is the government doesn't print money. That's what the Federal Reserve does. But it's like the bullshit of the cathedral, which is the description of the universities, the government, and the corporate press. But more specifically, how, the executive branch technically can't declare war. Congress has to declare war. They're all part of the same organization. Congress hasn't declared war since World War II. Right. But yet there have been many wars in American United States history. So the government uses this mechanism of saying, well, we don't print money. This is a private institution, but it's run by the government, the Federal Reserve. So what the Federal Reserve does is basically redeem these treasury bills by buying back bonds. They print the money out of thin air, snap of the fingers, which go directly to the banks. So now the banks have this money to then loan out. So they can make more loans because they just have to keep a 10% reserve ratio. Now, what happens is because interest rates, which are supposed to be the price of money in a society and also reflect time preference and reflect the amount of savings available for investment, is distorted, people begin to invest in things, in projects where they think they actually have real resources to do so. So it's like building a house. If you think you have a certain amount of bricks, you're going to create an architectural project and construct that project according to the resources you think are available. But if it turns out, let's say 80% of the way through that you don't have enough bricks, then you're going to have an unfinished house. And this is essentially what should be called the political cycle, but is commonly referred to as the business cycle or the boom bust cycle, is that it's a cycle of inflation from the banks going into the economy, followed by a recession, which is the ceasing of funds into certain lines of production that then have to be corrected, or prices have to correct. The amount of resources have to readjust in the economy. The recessionary period, which is basically establishing that what people actually want, what consumers actually want, is not what's in demand, because these businesses, these projects, these lines of production have been propped up not by consumer demand, but by loans, by bank stimulus, by artificial money. So they become like zombie companies and zombie corporations and are funded by the government and banks. I know this may be a little dry for a podcast. But coming back to this idea of inflation, we have to define inflation as an increase in the money supply that then causes increase in prices. Because if you think of inflation as just an increase in prices, you're completely missing how prices rose in the first place. If you just I just Googled yesterday, what is inflation, what causes inflation? And then it's all this like completely dismal demand pull, cost push bullshit. It's an increase in the money supply, devaluing each individual monetary unit, decreasing purchasing power, requiring more units of the medium of exchange to buy the same amount of goods and services. Now, yeah, does increasing the money supply necessarily affect all prices equally at the same time? No. And are there other reasons why prices adjust? Yes. But inflation, by definition, is an increase in the money supply. Now, if you increase the money supply by $1, probably not going to see much change in prices. But if you increase the money supply by trillions of dollars, what's going to happen? Well, the money goes to the banks. It gets loaned out, so it goes to the friends of the banks. They invest it. These people are the first receivers of money. That's not necessarily what's evil. But they go to the market, they buy goods. There's a new demand. noticed by producers for these certain goods. So the demand of goods increases, the price increases, the later receivers of the money, let's say the less fortunate people, get the newly created money. They go to the market, prices have already adjusted. So now they have to buy the same goods and services they were previously buying, but at new prices, usually increased prices. There is a downward pressure on prices from improved technology, improved productivity, but there's an upward pressure of prices by devalued medium of exchange. That's why money is different from all other goods. You don't necessarily need more of it in an economy. Whatever the amount is under a commodity standard is sufficient for making exchanges. But the evil of creating money is not that some people get it. The super zips of DC, the wealthiest people in the country. The evil is that it's another form of inflation, a stealth tax, that it devalues the real income, the real purchasing power of everyone else. That they become less wealthy. They have to spend more money for the same amount and sometimes even less amounts of goods and services. Furthermore, the money that is created by the central bank and goes to the banks, this money created by central banks goes into the military industrial complex, which obviously is a complex of creating weapons, not butter or clothes for people in our economy, but for creating weapons and bombs to go overseas and to destroy. Literally producing nothing for increasing wealth in our economy, but actually decreasing it by redistributing it and destroying it. So the government production, the monopolization, the legalized monopolization of money is contributing to destructionism, warfare, inflation, and socialism. This is the welfare warfare state that is becoming corporate America and leads to killing babies. People make money off killing babies. That's the truth. That's what the military industrial complex, the warfare welfare state is. So all you really need for freedom and for peace and to end this is freedom. Okay, to say that is one thing, but how do you obtain freedom? Because last time I checked, this country was supposedly the land of the free. So do you really care about freedom, or do you just want to say you care about freedom and LARP that you care about freedom? But if you want freedom, if you want individual sovereignty, then what you need is monetary sovereignty, because money power, in essence, is the life force for people in a society, in an economy. It's a representation of people's energy. And basically, taxation, income taxation, and more nefariously, inflation and redistribution of produced wealth and incomes is an intervention, is a corruption, a theft of people's monetary sovereignty, which in essence is a theft on people's individual sovereignty. So the next revolution, I think, for freedom will be with monetary sovereignty, with the separation of money and the state. And that will come with the evolution of money. Money has not yet finished evolving. It's still evolving constantly, probably indefinitely. Money is a medium of exchange. What's the best medium of exchange? Well, let me tell you this. There's nothing cheaper to produce than paper money. So that leads to inflation. I mean, if you give the government or anyone control to increase the money supply by 1% or 100%, it's going to be abused. You look at Weimar Republic, 1923, hyperinflation. Now, of course, there's multiple variables that contributed to that, but that's possible. But even in 2019, Lebanon, boom, hyperinflation. People lose their monetary wealth. You can't redeem your savings, your money in the banks. They closed the window to redemption. The banks don't have your money. It's fungible. They loan it out. If everyone right now went to the bank and asked for their money, not only would they decline to give you it, they made that illegal. Run on the banks, inciting a run on the bank is illegal. So probably an alternative medium of exchange is what's going to bring people monetary sovereignty, which then will bring them individual sovereignty from the debt slavery that has been created by the welfare warfare state of this contemporary government. But I don't want to be too much of I was trying to think of a joke. This cynicism of the state. I mean, frankly, it's due. Like, if you're optimistic that voting in a certain politician will bring you freedom, is quite naive, in my opinion. But yeah, in essence, this is what fractional reserve banking is. They keep a fraction of it, they loan it out, the money multiplier creates inflation and a recession. And the recession is the cleansing process. It's actually the sobering up process. This money power of creating money with the snap of your fingers while other people's have to actually work for their money. It's like a drug. It's very powerful and you don't know when to stop. So if you have the power to print money, they're gonna fucking go. Full speed ahead. No stop. This is the political cycle. Is because every 4 years, there's an election and you have to make the incumbent look good or the newcomer look good. Then they print money. And they think that that's what makes the economy look good. Look, stocks are up. But that is what leads to the political cycle, or what commonly referred to as the business cycle of inflation followed by a recession. And they prolong it and they actually make it more severe by continuously printing money over time. But the thing is with, the post-technological revolution, Dave Smith was just on Joe Rogan. And that Joe Rogan Experience Instagram page posted a clip of Dave discussing Ron Paul libertarianism and Austrian economics, how they're the only ones that understand that you can't have a world empire without a central bank to print all the money. And it's just a form of redistribution. The wealth we have going overseas for regime change and fighting wars that don't need to be fought. Unless you're part of the powerful elite who make money off the military industrial complex, which is a $6 trillion honeypot more or less murdering people and killing babies. Power is seductive. Money is seductive. So if you want an economist who is probably from a university that will defend inflation and central banks, they probably want recognition of status, of defending the government and whatnot. But if you want the truth, this is the truth. And I'd rather we live in better times so I could just make music. But it seems like I have to be an economist. However, science is art. Art is science. And being an economist is a form of art. And I think most people, even economists, don't understand that. I'm going to keep that with me. We're going to keep up speaking the truth, not giving into the seduction of power and evil. And we're going to have some fun. We're going to rock out. We're going to be enthusiastic. Enthusiasm comes from the Greek filled with God. So, enthusiasm is always the way. And as potentially heavy or dry or depressing as this information may be, which, maybe we'll probably develop in the future how artificially lowered interest rates lowers time preference, which lowers the time structure of production in investment projects like architecture and designer chic buildings. Loss of art in society, higher time preference contributing to, altering people's personalities, what they do with their actions, their psychology, even suicidality. As depressing as that may be, I think understanding all that will only make you stronger and only give you more reason to be optimistic and enthusiastic. Not only because it's the only rational way to operate, but because you have the truth. You understand what is so depressing in society, which is the only way to be so enthusiastic and optimistic about what society can be. Because you have now the cause and effect, logical understanding that if the state is, and socialism, the essence of the state, is the most deadliest virus in society, then removing this state from society will bring so much more peace and prosperity. It's beyond anarchy. Anarchy is the negation of the state, but in the state's absence, you understand market fundamentals. The market is just social cooperation. You go to the grocery store, that's a form of anarchy because no one's telling you to go. There's no third-party overseer. Yet you're making exchanges. You're better off. The grocery store is better off. They'll buy more goods. They'll buy better goods. You'll have better goods. You know what I mean? This is the market. It's a balloon growing. It's not a fixed pie. At once it was, before capital accumulation, investment, productivity, and prosperity. But we're only getting wealthier, and the state is severely limiting, redistributing, and destroying wealth. And that's the thing, is like, frankly, I'm understanding now, not only, as my favorite movie, V for Vendetta, said, um ideas are bulletproof, but that even with bullets cannot eradicate the truth. And when you don't have fear anymore, then you're free. It's an internal psychological freedom that has to precede social freedom. I wish I had more of a introduction or outro and some things going on. It'd be probably easier in conversation with someone, but this is what I got on my mind right now. I have some notes. I don't know. I am frankly excited. And I love you guys. So take care. And I'll talk to you next time. Peace.